Starting the live video. So we're going to talk about relationships based on a conversation that we had a little bit this morning. Relationships is obviously a huge topic, and I hope this creates some conversation for you and can maybe help you in any of your relationships. But if you're a coach, you're going to be dealing with the relationships all the time. And I have a philosophy based on something that I heard when I was in high school. We had a motivational speaker that said, your happiness, I think he said 90% of your happiness will be determined by who you choose to marry. He didn't go into it any more than that, but for whatever reason, I always remember that. And even while I was sabotaging all these different areas of my life when I was younger, and I had all these limiting beliefs about, I'm not good enough to succeed, and I'm not good enough to be great and all this stuff. For whatever reason, I held relationships differently. I didn't have that same belief in relationships. I wasn't willing to settle. I had very clear boundaries. Even if I couldn't articulate them, I had real clear boundaries. And, my wife and I just celebrated our 20th anniversary in Paris, which was awesome. And if I had anything to add to that statement, I would raise the percentage a little bit. Because I think that when your intimate relationship, singular, romantic relationship, or just relationships in general, when those are solid, then all of the stuff that happens in your life just really can't affect you all that much. So let's say this is your happiness in life in general. If the majority of your happiness is solid because your relationships are solid, I'm not going to spend the time filling that all in, but if like 90-95% of that happiness sphere is solid and can't be moved, then look at how much is available for your world to get shattered. It's really only a small percentage. That even if the worst things happen and you're solid in your happiness created by relationships, including your most intimate relationship, if you're in a relationship, marriage, or just serious partnership, then there's just not a whole lot of available disruption, because you just got a little thin layer that even if it blows up, you're still pretty good. But now let's flip that. What if this black part represents disruption in your life because you don't have the stability in your relationships? Then you go off and you get all the success in all the other areas. It only has a small thin layer available to provide you the happiness because everything else inside is chaos, right? So relationships are at the core of all happiness, I believe. And it doesn't mean you have to be in a committed relationship or in a marriage, because when you're not inside those relationships, you still have relationship as a concept in your friendships, business partnerships, and just everything in general. So it's those intimate relationships that when you get a handle on stability, changes the game. And then it makes success a lot easier because your whole world isn't dependent on it. People that don't have stability in their relationships, they have to succeed because it's the last thing that they can hold on to, right? And if they don't succeed and they already don't have stability in their relationships, then everything is chaotic, right? So my point in saying all of that is, as a coach, one of the best things you can do is help people get into more alignment and more stability. That might be a weird word to use with relationships, but I've been using that word a lot recently because that's actually what we're searching for in many areas of life. But in our relationships, we want stability, right? We don't want to not know if we're going to be okay tomorrow, if we're going to come home and they're going to say, whatever we're afraid of them saying, or we don't know if we can have a discussion and it's just going to go off the deep end or whatever. So stability in relationships are critical, and then that creates stability, more stability in life, and it makes everything else easier. That's not what I wanted to say on the video, though. So what I want to talk about on this video is how relationships evolve, right? And you've got 3 different entities. So my wife and I have a theory. We have a relationship book that we will publish sometime after today, and it's called You Can't Complete Me. The idea is that for a relationship to be healthy and clean, both people are whole and complete. That's the best case scenario. So if this is one person and this is the other person, and we're both whole and complete, then there's no overlap. It's the overlap that causes problems in relationships. If I'm not whole and complete, and I'm expecting you to complete me, that's dangerous. But if I'm whole and complete, and I want you to complement me, that's healthy. That's our theory. And then this other circle is the relationship itself. The relationship is its own entity, and there's no overlap at all. There's just complement, right? We're touching each other. So if you subscribe to this idea, then we got to take a look at these whole and complete people almost like on the outside of this relationship. How are we going to do this relationship? So all 3 of these circles are evolving every single day. We, in BCC, we open up all these discussions about beliefs and conflicts and metaprograms and wiring and, all the ways that we as human beings are different, individual, and we've got all these things trapped in our body. We've got all kinds of trauma in our body. That's the neurological piece that we talk about. And we're all so different that if you put 2 people together and then just say, okay, do life together, it's crazy that any 2 people could last a few years with each other, right? When all these things are changing and we're coming from so many different places. So we're talking a little bit about relationships this morning, this idea of the evolution of relationships, and this analogy came to mind. This is actually what I want to talk about on the video. Here is the collision point of 2 people getting into relationship, right? It doesn't matter where you meet. You meet in school or at a bar or online or whatever. But you collide at some point. These 2 lives that didn't know each other or knew each other for a long time but didn't get into relationship collide here. And then what happens is they continue to evolve, right? We're always going to continue to evolve. So this morning, I'm just going to tell them about our conversation a little bit. Charcy and I are talking this morning, and she was talking about a certain relationship, and she was telling this person that they've both changed, right? He's changed and you've changed, and you're just mad that he didn't change the way you changed. Or you can't see that he's also changing or that you have changed. Like, she was just opening up this awareness to both people in this relationship are evolving and moving, but you, the person she's talking to, you've got all these judgments around what should have happened or what didn't happen, or why does he think differently of me now after 2 kids and after all these things. But the reality is every single day we're evolving, right? So as we're talking about this relationship, I started to envision this circle, and this is the collision point where the relationship starts, right? And then one person is going to evolve in one direction, and the other person is going to evolve usually in a different direction. And so let's just say they're pretty close to each other. Let's say two people are evolving in somewhat similar directions, just a few degrees apart. Over the course of time, as this relationship grows, as this relationship evolves and gets older, you cross the year mark, the 5-year mark, the 10-year mark. Look at what happens when these two people continue to evolve. The distance between them increases. So then, what's this? How do we handle that distance? That's the tricky shit. And another conversation we've been having today is, how do we do conflict? Because if you now have distance where there was no distance, once upon a time you guys are totally aligned, but now there's distance, how do you handle that? Do you have enough self-awareness to realize that you are no longer the same person that you were at the collision point? They are no longer the same person they were at the collision point, without judgment or without making them wrong, or trying to make yourself right, or making yourself wrong and beating yourself up because you're now not totally aligned with who he or she now is. This relationship to conflict, I think, is more important than the relationship to the other person. Your relationship to the concept of conflict is going to be more important than your relationship to this other person, because there will be conflict, and the longer you spend together, you're not going to grow closer in the sense of being more aligned in your evolution. You might grow closer because you know each other and spend a lot of time together, but in terms of evolution, very rarely, well, I don't think ever, are any two people going to be evolving on the same line, because that is not going to produce a relationship. That's just going to produce two people on top of each other and probably get pissed at the other person's representation of, the crap that we don't like about ourselves, right? So I don't think that'll ever happen. And if you're not evolving on the exact same line, then how are you going to relate to the difference, the distance in between as you evolve? Now, this is assuming that two people are evolving in a similar direction. But what if they're not evolving in the same direction? What if you are going this way and the other person is going this way? That distance gets increasingly big exponentially the longer that this relationship progresses. And then here's what I thought of. Here's what I thought of that totally changed everything. This is going to be good. What if we don't look at the collision point? What if we look at the time up until the collision point? So this person did not start from this point. This person was floating in space in this direction. You were floating in space in that direction. And then you collided. We could say these two particles that are floating in space are only going to collide once, and that's the closest they'll ever be. And as soon as they move beyond that collision point, all it is separation. Now, is that a problem? Does that mean that he's wrong or she's wrong? No. That means that these two asteroids that were floating out in space were never meant to ever come together and be aligned. So sometimes, now this might sound really harsh, sometimes relationships, the best way to fix a relationship is to never get into it. Because it doesn't matter how amazing this collision point was And this collision point might have lasted a night, might have lasted a week, might have lasted 5 years, I don't know. But it doesn't matter how amazing that collision point was or how much you try to hold it together. The energy of these two opposing paths, you're actually doing a disservice to each of the paths trying to bring them together, because that's not where they're going. Now that might sound like a really negative view on relationships, but this is what I believe. And the more that we clear up whatever we've got going on, the easier it's going to be to sort of look out in space and go, oh, look at that. There's a meteor that's actually kind of on my same path, right? Now, there's so many details in here. So please don't take this at just the drawing, because I don't necessarily believe that, people have to be coming from the exact same path. I even said earlier, I don't think anybody will ever evolve on the exact same line. So that's not what I'm saying. And I do think that people can come from opposing paths and maybe collide and then sort of grow together, but that's an individual choice that each person makes separately, in my opinion. And I don't think that anybody can change another person, but somebody else can choose to change themselves. So I totally believe that people can make shifts in their own life, but if they want to. So if this path right here, if this meteor of a person doesn't want to change, and they're just on this path, how much energy should this person spend trying to change either of the paths? Trying to change yours to align with theirs or theirs to align with yours, that's really difficult. So where am I going with all this? I don't know. I didn't even know what I was going to say, other than I think, I knew I wanted to draw this drawing because I thought of it earlier this morning at coffee shop. So I don't have content, like I don't have a 1, 2, 3, but the concept that I want you to really grab onto is how you relate to conflict, because there's a lot of conflict here. There's a lot of distance there. And I also don't believe that two people necessarily need to be aligned in their growth, in their personal development, to stay in relationship with each other. I think one of the big challenges, which is what Charcy was hitting on with this other relationship she was talking about, one of the big challenges is that we expect our partners to evolve like we are. And when we are expecting our partners to evolve like we are, we're sitting in judgment, we're telling them that they're not okay, we're telling us that they're not okay, and we're telling us that we need them to continue our journey as well. So there's all kinds of this of the expectation that makes the relationship to conflict or the relationship to evolution negative and harder to handle. Solve. I was wanting to not say the word solve, but harder to solve. And so much of relationships and specifically require us to wholeheartedly accept the other person without judgment that they're wrong and they should be doing this and so forth. Wholeheartedly accept us. That's the whole concept of, I am complete and you are complete. Let's do life together. And then handle conflict inside of that. So here's the thing. So the conflict, in our model, the conflict lives here. The conflict doesn't live here. And the conflict doesn't live here. But if I am judging you as being wrong, then the conflict is here. How could that ever turn out okay? Because the only way we resolve conflict inside of the other person is they need to change, or we just need to settle for the loser that they are. Whatever level of losership you've assigned to them, we need to settle or they need to change. So when the conflict is in the person based on our judgment that they are not okay, this relationship can never be healthy and clean. But when I'm 100% complete and you are 100% complete, and we can talk about the conflict in our relationship, that doesn't mean you're wrong and doesn't mean that I'm wrong. Now we can solve this conflict because my identity is not wrapped up in it. My enoughness is not wrapped up in it. My righteousness is not wrapped up in it. We remove all of those emotional attachments that are not healthy in relationships. We remove all of that from the actual discussion. And when people talk about relationships, the discussion is usually about what you are doing. You're not doing this, you are doing that, you're disrespecting me. But in reality, the essence of the conversation is not what you are doing, it's that you're wrong in your being. You're not right. Therefore, what you're doing is not right. But a lot of people don't even have the awareness that that's actually how they're holding on to their partner, as being wrong. Therefore, nothing they can do is right because they are wrong. And so if we drop down to a different level of awareness and realize that we are sitting in judgment of the other person, they are not okay until they match our expectations of them. To me, in my standards of relationship, that can't ever work. Because there's always going to be a winner and there's always going to be a loser. And most people don't want to be the loser. So you'll either have people fighting for their ego, and I've got to be right, which is the core of almost all relationship arguments. Or somebody might be so afraid of the conflict that they take on the identity of always being the wrong one in the relationship and just being more submissive or passive or bending over backwards all the time, or have you. And that's not clean and healthy either, in my opinion. So relationships are, they're tricky, obviously. But they become so much easier and simpler when you take a lot of the concepts that we talk about in this course and we clean ourselves up first, right? I talked about, from a coaching standpoint, how important it is to clear your mirror. Do your work first so that you can help other people do their work. In relationships, it's the same way, except we're not trying to help them do their work. You've got to do your work first. Because here's the thing. Who decides that you're whole and complete? You do. We decide ourselves on whether we are whole and complete. That's an internal thing. That's a discussion between you and the person in the mirror. So when we decide that we are whole and complete, then we don't have to judge all the other people, because our judgments usually come from our incompleteness. Our judgments usually come from our not enoughness. And since we are not enough, then we're going to find how everybody else is not enough, or how everybody else should be filling our not enoughness up. So it's all coming from a place of brokenness. Our judgments that we project on other people are coming from our own negative judgments of ourselves. So if we can clean that up, and I don't pretend that you're going to be able to clean them all up and never have that stuff. But the more that we can clean up our own judgments of ourselves, and the more that we can be whole and complete in our eyes, you'd be amazed at how much more whole and complete other people tend to get almost overnight. And it's not that they changed at all, it's that you stopped looking for the brokenness outside of you because you're not seeing it inside yourself, right? So when we are feeling broken, when we're in judgment of ourselves, we are naturally going to project that onto other people. And some of that is because if we can see the brokenness in other people, then it's misdirection. It takes the focus off of the brokenness in ourselves. And it shows up as blame or resentment or any other ways, especially in relationships. So some of it is simply that we don't want to look at it. And it's easier to blame somebody else for being wrong or disrespectful or what have you. But if we can have the awareness to look inward first, clean up whatever needs to be cleaned up, and not project outward all of our brokenness, then we can move more closely into this model, and then the conflict in the relationship is actually separate. I've never thought of that before till right now. That's one of the reasons why my wife Sybil and I can talk about the relationship, the ways that we can talk. Now, we've never argued, we've never been mad at each other. We've had tons of conflict conversations, a ton of them. We just don't bring anger into it. That's the difference. We can talk about when this happened, when you did this is the way it made me feel. It's all compass of communication, the compass of clear communication that I taught in BCC. And then we can actually have really clean conversations about conflict. And here's the cool thing. Every time we have a clean conversation about conflict, we actually get closer. And that's not always the case when people have discussions which sometimes turn into arguments and fights about conflict. A lot of times the two people walk away feeling more broken or feeling more judged. So when we can isolate the conflict inside the relationship, that the conflict is not in me, the conflict is not in you, but there are things in the relationship that we need to discuss, that's how clean communication happens. And it's awesome. I've been in several discussions with my wife where I almost had this out-of-body experience, like looking down at these two people having a discussion. And I said, if I was just reading the transcript of the words coming out of their mouth, this is like a potential divorce conversation. Like, we're talking about really combustible stuff right now. But we were doing it in such a healthy, clean way that it was amazing. I don't even know how to articulate it. It was incredible. And every time we get closer because we don't have those judgments. Now, I'm also not going to say that I live my life without projecting my crap onto my wife, because I do all the time. But they're small, like little things, you know. I was joking with Charcy earlier today. I was like, yeah, well, she burnt my toast yesterday, and I let her have it, you know. That actually didn't happen. I was just using a fake example. But the irritations in our relationship are so relatively insignificant. But we handle them. And even if they are significant, we handle them in the exact same way. So hopefully this has been somewhat valuable. This whole concept right here, I don't know where this is going to go, but a lot of it is just around awareness. And how do we manage the expectations of the two people evolving? One of the things I told Charcy is, you know, most of us are expecting in a relationship for the other person to evolve just like we are evolving. And it's kind of like, you know, you both, at the collision point, we both step on a certain railroad track, and I walk on my rail and she walks on her rail, and we can hold hands, but we're expecting ourselves to walk that same track for the rest of our relationship at the same speed. Find any two people that can do that. I just don't even think it's possible. So much of this journey is managing our own expectations, projection of our irritations and all that, and it's all an internal game. That's why this work is so powerful, and it spits most people out. Because when we start taking a look at ourselves, the heat gets turned up, and a lot of people don't like that. So becoming a coach will cause everybody who stays in it to increase their own level of self-awareness. And when you increase your own level of self-awareness, most of the time you increase your pain. Because we're bringing up things that were dormant. We're bringing up things that were swept under the rug, and we're saying, hey, if we're going to be as clean and as healthy emotionally as we possibly can in this life, then we need to lift up the rug and look for the things that don't even have any bumps anymore, right? It's easy to see when like the cat is under the rug and it's got a big old bump. It's easy to see those big things in our lives. Well, transformational coaches, the ones that want to play it at the highest level, we don't just look for the bumps and then chase the bumps. We flip the rug over and go, are there any little specks in there that might be operating that we don't even know about? And that's not fun because we are seeking the irritation. We are seeking the disruption. So it's not fun from an emotional standpoint. But if you really think about what's the point of this life, I think one of the points, one of our purposes on this planet is to evolve individually, which requires us to take a look at ourselves. I think one of the most sacred gifts we could ever give ourselves is to know ourselves. And so when we play the pain avoidance game, we also play the self-avoidance game. Because really the only way to avoid the pain is to not know yourself. It's really the only way. And if we're more committed to avoiding the pain, then that means we're committed to not exposing anything that might produce trauma, triggers, anger, irritations. And so many of us are so afraid of that we actually miss the opportunity to know who we are. And I firmly believe that the biggest lesson for all of us in this conversation of knowing ourselves, if we really want to know ourselves, we have to not only touch, but we have to dig into that most painful thing. The thing that you don't want to touch, the thing that none of us wants to touch, the biggest sacred gift is in the middle of that. And I honor all of you in this course. If you're still listening to this video and I haven't pissed you off or scared you away at this point, then that means you're one of those people that have the determination to know yourself, to just seek knowledge and to get into this relationship conversation that very quickly turns into a self-relationship conversation. So I honor you for that, and I really acknowledge you for that. And I got to tell you, most people are not willing to play that game. It's really a willingness game. It's not a skill set issue, it's a willingness game. And to go even deeper into that, I got to stop this video because this is going to be 5 hours long if I keep trailing. But to go even deeper into that, it's a safety game. Do you feel safe in your exploration of your own pain? Because if you don't feel safe in your exploration of your own pain, then we'll never want to do it. And if we don't feel safe in exploring our own pain, how can we feel safe? No. How can others feel safe around us? Because sometimes we can feel safe around other people if we don't feel safe around ourselves. But how can we produce trust in other people to feel safe around us at the highest levels if we don't feel safe around us? That's the game. Let me know what you think. This is deep stuff right here.